My son forgot to pick me up from the hospital, so I rented a car, drove home, and found out they'd changed the locks, so I changed the will. I did not forget to pick you up, Delilah. I chose not to. So what? Let them wheel your old corpse into the hospital morgue and leave you there. Honestly, every time I see you, I want to throw up. I remember the click of the hospital clock, the hollow sound it made every hour like a knock on a door no one was ever going to open. I was lying there, sore from gallbladder surgery with the IV drip hissing beside me and a dull throb crawling under my ribs, each breath stretched against the bandage wrapping my abdomen. The nurse had just said I could be discharged. I nodded feigned gratitude and reached for my phone. Outside the window, the trees of late autumn in Maine stood like tired old ghosts, their branches twitching in a wind that smelled like the end of something. I had called him 5 times. Grayson Cotter, my only son. My only child. First call straight to voicemail. Second, the same. The third connected then dropped. The fourth rang, no answer. 5th time, he picked up. I barely got out a hello before he launched in. Voice sharp like tin in my ear. My fingers clenched the phone knuckles aching. I didn't speak. I didn't trust my voice, but I heard hers. Belle, my daughter-in-law, laughing behind him. That tight, mocking laugh she used like punctuation. Why is she calling again? Jesus? It's like having a zombie on speed dial. Smells the same too. Grayson didn't correct her. He chuckled. That same condescending sound he used on telemarketers. Don't call us every 5 minutes like a lost dog. We're not your taxi old woman. Then click. The silence after was louder than the beeping of my monitor. I just sat there. My hand shook, not just from the anesthesia wearing off, but from something heavier, something final. If you feel justice deserves celebration, smash that hype button. Let us keep stories like this alive, echoing far, far away. Your support helps us bring understanding and love to those who deserve it. Thank you so much, and keep listening. The nurse came in with my discharge papers. She smiled gently and asked if my family was on their way. I lied and said yes. I packed slowly, each movement tugged at the incision, like my body itself was reluctant to move forward. I folded my nightgown into the small canvas bag and paused by the window. The lot below looked blurred, not from rain, but from what I refused to let fall from my eyes. Maybe he was having a hard day. Maybe Belle had poisoned him again with her little insinuations. But somewhere in the quiet between my ribs, I knew the truth. This wasn't new. They hadn't just stopped loving me. They had started resenting me. I called a taxi. The driver, no older than 20, jittery and polite, helped me with my bag. When he asked if I was heading home to family, I simply said no. He dropped me at the rental car office 3 miles from the hospital. I signed the papers with a hand still trembling and slid into a 2011 Corolla that smelled faintly of old cigarettes and pine-scented cleaner. The seat was too low, the gear shift stiff. I adjusted the mirror and saw myself pale drawn eyes rimmed in gray. I looked like someone who had been erased in pencil and forgotten to be redrawn. I drove. The roads unwound slowly through thinning trees. The sky sagged like old fruit, bruised and overripe. My side HAD with every bump, every corner. I kept the radio off. I didn't want music. I didn't want noise. I wanted to remember, and I did. I remembered waking at 4 every Christmas morning to bake cinnamon rolls before Grayson padded down the stairs in his footed pajamas. I remembered selling my engagement ring, the one Thomas gave me after saving up for 7 months so Grayson could pay for his first semester of college. I remembered holding his hand when they set the bone in his shattered leg. I remembered standing like marble at Thomas's funeral because my son needed someone solid. I remembered every single thing. I pulled into our neighborhood as the light waned and shadows stretched thin across the sidewalks. Same painted porches, same trimmed hedges, same soft glow from windows that didn't know what rejection felt like. I turned into the driveway of the house that used to be mine. The porch light was on. Curtains drawn, front steps swept clean. I stepped out, one hand clutching the canvas bag, the other bracing my ribs. My key was cold in my palm. I pushed it into the lock. It didn't fit. I tried again and again. Nothing. I knocked once, then again. Movement behind the curtain. Grayson. I called my voice barely above the breeze. For a moment, nothing. Then her voice. Belle. Maybe then the house would finally stop smelling like dust and regret. The porch light flicked off. I stood there. The dark pressing against me like a verdict. No coat, no home, no sun. I turned back to the car, drove in silence, parked outside the only motel in town still willing to accept cash. The girl at the front desk barely looked up, gave me a key without asking questions. I walked into the room, flipped the lock, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the wall until my back stiffened from the stillness. I did not cry, not then. I did not scream. I simply whispered to no one, to nothing. I see now. I see you both. And in that quiet room with my stomach stitched and my soul unraveling, I made a decision. I was going to change everything. I do not remember the rain starting, only that it had already settled in by the time I turned onto my street. Not a dramatic downpour, just that slow, needling drizzle that slips into your collar and makes your bones feel borrowed. The kind of rain that whispers quietly but clearly, "You are not wanted here." The windshield wipers dragged across the glass with a tired squeak, like they were as reluctant to keep going as I was. My hands gripped the wheel tighter than necessary. My palms were cold, my knuckles pale and stretched under skin that used to be firmer. Every bump in the road nudged the ache beneath my bandages. Then I saw it. The house. Familiar, unfamiliar. I had lived in that house for over 4 decades. It was where Thomas carried me across the threshold, where Grayson learned to ride a bike, scraped his knees, shouted with joy the first time he stayed upright, where I hemmed dresses by the kitchen window, where Thomas planted the hydrangeas so blue they could make your breath catch in June. Now the driveway was smooth and new. The porch railings had been repainted. The welcome mat said, "Home is where the wine is." The hydrangeas were gone, ripped out and replaced with 2 sterile pots holding fake L-looking topiaries that were too perfect to be real. I pulled up to the curb, heart crawling toward my throat. The engine ticked as it cooled. I shut it off, but sat a moment, eyes fixed on the house I used to belong to. The lights were on. Living room, kitchen, dining room. Shadows moved through the windows, figures walking, talking. They were home. I reached for the door handle. My body resisted. Everything hurt more after the drive. The dull surgical pull in my side, the tight ache in my thighs. Still I stood. I grabbed my bag from the passenger seat, wrapped my coat tighter around me, and climbed the steps slowly. One hand on the railing, one foot carefully placed, breathing shallow. I had to pause halfway to gather myself. I reached the door. Familiar door. My door. I pulled out my key, slid it into the lock. It didn't turn. I blinked, pulled it out, tried again. Still nothing. I stared at it. My house key sitting in the lock like a joke. I'd had that key longer than I'd had gray hair. It had worked last week. Then I saw it. A new lock, shinier, thicker, brassy, and untouched by time. They had changed it. My lips parted, but no sound came. I reached out and knocked 3 times. Not loud, just enough to be heard over the drizzle. The sound felt small. No answer. I knocked again. Nothing. A shadow shifted behind the curtain. I saw movement on the staircase inside. Grayson, I called just above a whisper. "It's me." No response, no footsteps. Then a voice. "Belle, you're not supposed to be here, Delilah." Her voice carried from the second-floor window, sharp and clear through the glass. "You should have stayed in the hospital, or better yet, found yourself a retirement home where they hand out Jell-O and call you sweetheart." I froze, my hand still resting on the doorframe, the rain now soaking my collar, threading its way down my back like cold fingers. She kept going. "Honestly, this house smells better without you in it. Less mothballs and martyrdom." A laugh followed. Not kind, not amused, just mean. I turned back to the door and knocked once more, louder this time. It stung my side. "Grayson," I said. "Grayson." A long pause then. Movement. I saw him at the bottom of the stairs inside just for a second. He walked across the hall. I knew that gait. I knew that silhouette. He stopped by the front door. He was right there. All he had to do was reach out, turn the knob, say my name. I held my breath. He turned away, walked back into the shadows, vanished. The porch light clicked off. I stood there for another minute, watching the dark window, hoping stupidly that maybe he'd change his mind. Maybe the boy who used to hold my hand in the grocery store would return. Maybe. No. I stepped down each foot, heavy, the wet concrete like ice under my soles. I walked back to the car, my coat clinging to me like regret. I didn't cry. Not yet. I just sat behind the wheel and stared at the house. Their house. Now they'd done it. They'd erased me. I backed out of the driveway, headlights sweeping across the front steps where I had once stood with Thomas taking family photos, where I had once waved to neighbors with Grayson on my hip. No one waved now. I drove past Eloise's house. Her curtains were drawn. The porch light was off. I thought about stopping, knocking on her door. But something in me had shut down. I didn't want comfort. I wanted clarity. The road wound out of the neighborhood and led me back to the edge of town. The motel sign flickered faintly in the rain. Vacancy blinked like a dying heartbeat. I pulled in. The girl at the front desk didn't ask my name. Didn't ask anything. I paid in cash. She slid me a key card and pointed down the hall. Room 212. I closed the door behind me and locked it twice. The air smelled faintly of mildew and air freshener that had given up. The bedspread was coarse, the carpet thin, but it was mine for now. I peeled off my wet clothes, shivering as the cold clung to my skin like a second betrayal. I changed into the hospital discharge sweater, still smelling faintly of antiseptic, and sat on the edge of the bed. I tried to remember the last time Grayson hugged me. I could not. The last time Belle smiled at me without venom, I could not. The last time my house felt like it needed me. It had been years, and now it did not even recognize me. I sat there a long time, no television, no light except the one from the cracked lampshade. I whispered, barely audible. They changed the locks. And then, after a long pause, long enough for the hurt to settle into something sharper, I said, "So I will change everything else." There is a particular kind of silence that settles on you when you realize your own child has rewritten the story of who you are. That night in the motel, wrapped in a scratchy polyester blanket with the TV off and the rain still ticking against the window like a metronome set to despair. I did not sleep. Instead, I remembered not because I wanted to, but because silence always brings memory with it, and memory, especially the kind you have buried deep enough to survive decades, does not knock before entering. I remembered who I used to be, who I still was somewhere under all this grief and dust. Before I was a mother. I was a maker. I had hands that knew fabric like a second language. I could tell the difference between French silk and Italian chiffon. With my eyes closed, I ran my own tailor shop in Boston for over 30 years. Delilah's Dressings, they called it, on Teamont Street, next to the flower shop and the bookstore that smelled like pipe smoke and secrets. I stitched wedding gowns for 3 generations of one family. I hemmed opera capes, theater costumes, christening robes, prom dresses. People came to me for the moments they would remember forever, and I remembered Thomas, a high school literature teacher, who smelled like peppermint and woods, who read sonnets to me in the bathtub, who proposed with a thimble instead of a ring, because he knew I'd wear that more often. We built a quiet life. We built Grayson. Thomas had a voice that carried calm even when the world tilted sideways. When he got sick, he still read to me, still made me laugh. And just before he died, he held my hand in that hospital bed and said, "Delilah, keep the land in your name. If something ever happens, protect yourself. People change." I did not argue with him. I never had when he spoke like that. And after he was gone, I honored his wishes. We had bought that property in Maine together, a fixer-upper of a house with land that stretched out like open arms. After Thomas died, I sold the shop in Boston and moved back to Maine. Grayson was already there with Belle, and I thought, maybe we could begin again. I brought the deed with me. I kept it in a small lockbox at the bottom of my hope chest. Not because I was planning anything, not because I distrusted them, but because my husband asked me to. Grayson did not take it well. At first, it was small things. Passive comments at dinner about not being treated like family. Questions disguised as jokes like, "You still think I'm that teenager who stole $20 from your purse?" And then slowly the jokes stopped being jokes. One morning we were sitting at the kitchen table. I had made coffee. I offered him the cream. He looked at me and said, "You do not trust me, do you?" "You never have. Not really. You never saw me as a man, just some obligation you carried too long." I had no words for that, only silence. And he took that silence as guilt. Belle did not help. She had always been polite in that plastic, brittle way that women sometimes use when they do not want to bother hiding their contempt. She hugged with her chin high, complimented my cooking like it was an act of charity, and treated my presence in the house like an aesthetic flaw she could not quite sand down. But once the question of the land became public, when Grayson began to complain to her that I held the res too tightly, her disdain turned into narrative. She became the storyteller, and I was her villain. I overheard her on the phone one afternoon, voice loud and careless in the next room, thinking I was out back. "She lives for control," she said. "She hoards property and trauma like old people hoard pills. She's the mildew under our wallpaper. We try to live a modern life, and she's in the background with her dusty little apron and those judgmental eyes like a bad smell we can't clean out." That was the day I stopped baking for them. That was the day I realized I was no longer the quiet foundation they built on. I had become the crack in the wall they wanted to plaster over. Friends of hers started treating me like a tenant. They would come for dinner and greet me with condescending smiles. "Oh, hi, Delilah. Still here." How cute. One of them called me a legacy decoration right in front of me, thinking I would not understand the phrase. Belle laughed. The worst part, Grayson said nothing. Even when he heard them, even when I stood right there, he never corrected them, never told them to stop. Because deep down, I think he believed it too. That I was an embarrassment, a relic, a mistake they could not quite get rid of because it would look bad on paper. It was not about the land. It was never just about the land. It was about the idea that I still had power they had not been given, that I still mattered in a way that complicated their picture-perfect life. And Bilal? She was always more interested in pictures than people. Our house became her showroom. Every piece of furniture had a hashtag. She posted videos of redecorating the old woman's room without ever saying my name. She changed the wallpaper in the hallway and called it detoxifying the energy. She had the audacity to hang a photo of her own mother in the living room, large framed and glowing, after tucking away the only picture I had of Tomas and me. When I asked where it went, she said, "Oh." It clashed. And just like that, my memories were removed from the walls of my own home. Over time, they stopped inviting me to their dinners. They hosted parties without mentioning them. They laughed in rooms I was not welcome in. I became the sound of slippers down the hallway, a door that opened and shut too softly to count. I was disappearing in increments. And every time I tried to speak to push back, I was called difficult, dramatic, too emotional. Belle told her friends I was rebranding victimhood as senior citizenship, that I was performing elderliness for sympathy points, that my vibe was outdated and depressing. I had become, in their story, the mother no one wanted to remember. And that is how they made it easier to forget they loved me once, by convincing themselves I was never lovable to begin with. But I remembered. I remembered everything. I remembered who I was. And I knew now, sitting in that motel room alone, with the heater rattling beside me, that if they had rewritten my story, it was time I wrote an ending of my own, one that did not ask for permission, one that did not wait for kindness, because if they wanted me erased, they would have to learn what it meant to be written out themselves. The camera was the size of a coat button, tucked discreetly into the corner of the bookshelf in the hallway outside my room. I bought it online, paid in cash at the pharmacy, and followed the instructions with trembling hands. I did not tell anyone I installed it. I did not need their permission. I needed proof. I had never imagined I would live to a point in my life where I felt safer with surveillance. But when silence becomes strategy, evidence becomes protection. It started with things going missing. My sewing scissors and necklace. Thomas gave me a box of letters I had written but never sent. Then came the locked pantry. The new labels on food containers for household use only. The way Belle spoke to me changed too, like I was an employee who had stayed too long, like a smell they could not scrub out of the curtains. Grayson never said much, but his silence was not neutral. It was agreement worn like a mask. And when I once mentioned feeling unsafe, his only response was, "Maybe you're just too sensitive for the way the world is now." So I stopped talking. I started watching. The camera had been running for months, collecting snippets of footage in grainy black and white. I rarely looked at it, just enough to keep the battery charged to swap the memory card. It was not until the week after they locked me out of my own home that I sat in the motel room with a cup of weak coffee and watched the clips in sequence. I did not expect what I found. Halloween. Belle had hosted a party. Not a surprise she loved curated chaos, but I had not known about this one. They told me they were visiting friends that weekend. I had gone to bed early with a sore hip and woke up to an empty house. But there it was on the footage, October 31st, the hallway filled with unfamiliar laughter, high heels clicking across the hardwood, voices shouting from the living room. I fast forward. Then I saw her. Belle wearing a gray curly wig, a long beige cardigan. I recognized one of mine. A plastic oxygen tube looped clumsily around her ears and into her nose. She walked with an exaggerated hunch, one arm bent at an awkward angle, the other dragging a cane that was really a broomstick wrapped in tinfoil. She shuffled into view, muttering nonsense in a fake quivering voice. "Oh dear, where did I put my pills, Grayson? Did you take my heating pad again? This room smells like morality." The crowd behind her howled with laughter. And then Grayson appeared on screen. My son holding his phone, recording her smiling. No, beaming. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "Delilah the mummy. Still won't die." Belle shrieked with joy, twirled around, pretended to cough into a tissue, then dropped it on the floor and yelled, "I used to be respected. Now I'm just mold in a cardigan." Someone off camera shouted more like passive-aggressive taxidermy. Grayson laughed so hard, he doubled over. The video ended there. I stared at the laptop screen for a long time. I did not flinch. I did not cry. I simply reached over to my bag, pulled out a blank DVD from the pocket of my coat, and burned the footage onto it, labeled it with neat handwriting. October 31st, hallway camera, 8:42 p.m. Then I slipped it into a slim plastic case and called the only person in town I trusted, Eloise Garner. She picked up on the second ring, her voice warm and crisp like autumn leaves underfoot. "Delilah, sweetheart, what's going on?" I asked if she could meet me discreetly. "No questions yet." She said yes. We met at the church garden the next morning. It was empty except for 2 crows perched on the bench where we sat. I handed her the disc and said, "If anything happens to me, this is why." She looked me dead in the eye and said, "They do not know who they are playing with, do they?" I smiled, but it did not reach my cheeks. "No," I said. "They never cared to learn." After that, I walked back to the motel slower than usual. Not because I was tired, but because I wanted to feel every step. The air was sharp with the smell of pine and impending snow. Maine had a way of reminding you that beauty and bitterness lived side by side. Back in the motel, I brewed another cup of weak coffee and sat on the bed replaying the video in my mind. Not because I wanted to relive the humiliation, but because I needed to understand the performance. Every detail, every line, every laugh. They had not just mocked me. They had rehearsed it, crafted it, designed it to please an audience. They made me a character in their little show. But they forgot something. I was never background noise. I was never a prop. I had built that house with Thomas, sewn every curtain, patched every chair. I had raised Grayson under that roof, taught him to tie his shoes, wipe his nose, read his first sentence. I had buried my husband with dignity and cooked every Sunday dinner for years afterward, even when no one said thank you. I was the mortar between every brick they now lived inside. And they had the audacity to parody me, to turn me into a Halloween joke, a joke so cheap it would not survive past a punchline. They thought I would stay quiet. They thought shame would keep me still. But shame is a familiar coat to women like me. We wear it until it frays. Then we fold it and put it away and wear resolve instead. That night, I wrote a list. I titled it Final Things. Update will retrieve original deed from safe deposit box. Call Ava Mendoza. Order transcripts from camera footage. Change everything. I put the pen down and stared at the last item. Change everything. It would not be quick. It would not be loud, but it would be permanent. Because when people laugh at you like that, they are not laughing to be cruel. They are laughing because they think you cannot do anything about it. And that is exactly when you must. So I folded the list, tucked it into my bra like a prayer, and I whispered to the empty room, "Delilah the mummy, huh? Let's see who is buried first." The first snowfall of the season came on a Monday, quiet and unannounced. I woke to a world gone pale. Trees softened with powder rooftops dusted like sugar. The motel parking lot hushed under a thin blanket of white. Everything looked clean untouched. But I knew better. I made 2 calls that morning. The first was to the bank where Thomas and I had opened our joint account 43 years ago. It was also where we had rented a safe deposit box 117, tucked into the bottom row, the key to which I had worn on a chain around my neck ever since he died. Just in case, just like he asked. The second call was to Ava Mendoza. She picked up on the first ring. "Miss Delilah," she said, her voice still soft, like I remembered, but steadier now, a woman grown. I need to open a door I've kept closed too long, I told her. And I need someone smart enough to stand beside me when I do. I have been waiting for this call for 15 years, she replied. I arrived at the bank just after noon. The manager still recognized me, though his hair was thinner and his tone more cautious. I presented the key, signed the necessary forms, and followed him through 2 locked doors and down a narrow corridor into the vault. He knelt to open the box and stepped aside. "Take your time, Miss Carter," he said. I did not rush. The metal drawer was heavier than I remembered. Inside a stack of yellow documents, a velvet pouch containing my grandmother's earrings, a sealed envelope with my name written in Thomas's handwriting, and 1 folded sheet, thicker paper, aged but intact. I opened the letter first. It was dated April 12, 2009, 3 months before Thomas died. Delilah, my love, it began. If you are reading this, it means the world has gone a bit colder, and it means I am no longer beside you to keep it warm. I know you. I know you'll carry on quietly, maybe too quietly, so I'm leaving you something louder. The document beneath it was a notarized amendment to our original estate plan, something Thomas had drawn up with an old friend at the courthouse in Bangalore. It granted me full discretion to override the family inheritance if I at any time experienced neglect, abuse, or abandonment at the hands of our heirs. It named no specific individuals. It simply said, in the event that Delilah Jane Carter is treated without dignity, she shall be entitled to reallocate all assets as she sees fit. The assets included the house Grayson now lived in, the adjoining rental property we once leased to a local teacher, 7 acres of land up near Belfast, where Thomas had dreamed of building a community garden, and a retirement portfolio valued at just over $1,250,000. I folded the papers carefully, placed them in my purse, and left the vault feeling 10 pounds lighter and 10 years older. That evening I met Ava in her office above the bakery on Main Street. It was a modest space. Old oak desk law books stacked neatly on every shelf, a window that overlooked the town square, now coated in snow. She looked up as I entered and smiled. "Still wear your hair the same way," she said, "and still walk like you own the place." "I used to," I replied. She poured tea without asking and gestured for me to sit. I handed her the documents and waited while she read. Her eyes did not widen, her jaw did not drop, but her grip on the paper tightened. "This," she said slowly, "is enforceable." I nodded. "And the footage?" she asked. "I have copies, physical and digital, dated, time-stamped, and witnesses. One Eloise Garner and a nurse at the hospital who overheard the discharge call." She leaned back in her chair, hands folded under her chin. "I will take the case. I cannot pay you. You already did," she said, 15 years ago when you made my graduation dress for free, when my mama could not afford one, and you told her dignity should never come with a price tag. I stared at her for a long moment. "You remember that I wore it like armor. I still have it in my closet." The silence between us was no longer empty. It was full of history of purpose. Ava laid out the plan methodically. We would file for a protective order based on elder abuse and emotional distress. We would submit the footage, the witness testimonies, and the letter from Thomas as evidence. And we would initiate a formal request to transfer all holdings into a new trust, one that excluded Grayson and Belle entirely. "No court in Maine will look kindly on what they did," Ava said, "especially not with video." I nodded again, this time with steel in my spine. "What do you want the new trust to do?" she asked. I did not hesitate. "I want it to protect people like me. Women who are quiet too long. Women who are told their value ends when their skin wrinkles and their usefulness fades. I want it to be a weapon in the hands of the forgotten." Ava smiled. "Then we build you an arsenal." We signed the first batch of documents that night. I left the office with a file folder under my arm and the kind of resolve that does not shiver in the cold. Back at the motel, I placed the folder beside the television and sat on the bed. They had changed the locks, mocked my breath, my body, my age. But they had forgotten one thing. Thomas had never stopped protecting me. Even from the grave, he had left me one final shield, and now with Ava at my side, I would use it not for revenge, but for reclamation, because sometimes justice is not loud. Sometimes it is sealed in an envelope, and all it needs is a woman brave enough to open it. The courthouse in Bangor was old enough to remember better days. Its wood-paneled walls held echoes of justice handed down through generations, and on the morning of my hearing, it smelled faintly of lemon oil and tension. I wore navy blue, not black. This was not a funeral. I had already buried the version of me that begged to be let in. This was something else entirely, a quiet resurrection. Ava walked beside me, her heels clicking with purpose. She had brought everything, our evidence, our witnesses, and something Grayson and Belle never expected: the truth neatly organized in files backed by law. The courtroom was fuller than I anticipated. Maybe it was the novelty of a woman my age standing alone against her own blood. Maybe it was Belle's curated network of supporters wanting a show. I gave them one, but not the kind they came for. Grayson sat at the defendant's table, arms folded, jaw tight. He looked older than I remembered, not aged, just emptied. Belle sat beside him in a beige pantsuit, too bright for the room, her hair styled perfectly, her face brittle. I could smell her perfume from my seat. Synthetic roses overwrought. The judge entered. Everyone rose. I kept my hands steady on the edge of the table. It began with Ava presenting the claim. Elder abuse, emotional harassment, property exploitation. She stated the facts without embellishment, clear cutting. Then came the evidence. First, the clip. The courtroom darkened as the screen lit up. There, in black and white, Belle pranced across the hallway in costume. My cardigan fake oxygen tank cane made from a broomstick, her voice high-pitched and cracking. "Oh dear, where did I put my pills?" Laughter from the party echoed through the speakers. Then Grayson's voice clear as crystal. "Delilah the mummy still won't die." A few gasps scattered through the courtroom. One woman shook her head and muttered, "Shameful." When the lights came back on, Belle was pale. Grayson refused to look up. Then Ava presented my journals, dozens of entries written in my hand, cataloging months of neglect, cold meals, locked cabinets, parties I was excluded from in my own home. Finally, Eloise took the stand. She did not cry, did not falter. She came to my house soaking wet, she told the court. They had changed the locks, refused to let her in. That is not a misunderstanding. That is cruelty. The defense tried to argue it was all a miscommunication, that the clip was a joke among friends, that I was struggling with memory and reinterpreting things emotionally. The judge interrupted. "You're arguing her memory is faulty while the video shows your clients mocking her existence." The defense went quiet after that, and then it was my turn. I stood, did not need notes. I spoke softly. I told the judge about the years I spent building that home, the sacrifices I made, the dignity I gave without asking for much in return. I told them about the smell of bleach in the laundry room where my picture used to hang, about how silence can be a scream when it comes from your own child. "I am not here because I want revenge," I said, voice steady. "I am here because I wanted on record that I was not invisible, that I was not irrelevant, that I was and still am someone worth respecting." The judge nodded. He called for recess. When we returned, the courtroom was silent, and then he spoke. "In the matter of Delilah Jane Carter versus Grayson and Belle Carter," he began, "this court finds in favor of the plaintiff." Grayson flinched. Belle blinked rapidly. The judge continued, "Effective immediately. The defendants are ordered to vacate the primary residence and adjoining property within 21 days. The plaintiff retains full ownership and authority over said assets. Additionally, the court awards $300,000 in damages to Miss Carter for emotional and reputational harm. A no-contact order is issued prohibiting the defendants from coming within 50 meters of Miss Carter's person, residence, or place of business." The courtroom exhaled as one. Belle fainted, collapsed right there in her chair like a puppet with its strings cut. The bailiff rushed to her side, but I did not move. I simply watched. Grayson remained seated, head bowed, shoulders shaking, but not with tears, with something else. Maybe realization, maybe shame, maybe just the weight of consequences finally catching up. He did not speak. I did not need him to. I walked out of that courthouse taller than I had in years. Outside, snow had begun falling again, gentle, relentless. Ava handed me a copy of the judgment. "It's over," she said. "No," I replied. "It's only just begun." Because justice had spoken, not with fists, not with screaming, but with truth. And for once that was enough. The house was quiet when I returned. Not silent the way grief is silent, but peaceful the way an old quilt wraps around your shoulders just right. They were gone. Grayson and Belle had moved out 3 days before the court-ordered deadline. No note, no apology. Just a set of designer coasters left on the kitchen counter like a final insult. I threw them in the bin without a word. I walked through every room barefoot, listening to the creaks and echoes. The house felt bigger somehow, less full of ghosts, more full of breath. But I knew it would never be home again. Not the way it once was, not the way Thomas and I built it to be. So I made a decision. A week later, the papers were signed. I donated the entire property house land rental unit and garden to the Northern Maine Women's Resilience Foundation. They specialized in transitional housing for elderly women escaping abuse or abandonment. It was the only center of its kind in the county. They had a wait list a mile long and nowhere to go. Now they had a place. I stood on the front porch, my porch, as the new sign was unveiled. Maison of Quiet Courage. It was Ava's idea, the name, because what you did, she said, was not loud, but it was strong and it was right. They gave me a room of my own, small sunlit, tucked near the back where the hydrangeas used to bloom. I turned it into a little workshop, a place for sewing, baking, and teaching women like me how to write wills that would not be ignored. Every Tuesday afternoon, we gathered at the long dining table. Some had bruises still fading. Some had eyes that wouldn't make contact yet. But all of them carried stories no one had listened to until now. I taught them to bake ginger cookies from scratch. I taught them to mend buttons and stitch seams and patch more than just fabric. I taught them how to keep records, how to document everything, how to make their names unerasable. Some brought tears, others brought laughter. One brought a cat. And week by week, the house began to hum again, not with cruelty, but with community. Meanwhile, outside these walls, my past caught up with its karma. Belle launched a GoFundMe within 2 weeks of the verdict. She titled it, "Starting Over After Elder Abuse Accusations Ruined My Life." She posted curated photos of herself looking sad and windswept, standing outside a thrift store with designer sunglasses tucked artfully in her collar. "I was misrepresented," she wrote. "We were all just trying to help Delilah, but the media twisted everything. We were caregivers, not criminals." She raised $482 in the first 3 days. Then the clip resurfaced. Someone probably from Ava's office leaked the Halloween video online. It spread like frost on a windshield. Twitter, Reddit, even TikTok. Suddenly, Belle was no longer a misunderstood daughter-in-law. She was the woman who mocked her sick mother-in-law on camera, then begged for money online. The backlash was swift. Her GoFundMe was flooded with comments. Mocking the elderly isn't cute, Belle. Delilah the mummy. More like Belle the bully. I hope your costume keeps you warm when karma kicks in. Within 48 hours, the fundraiser was shut down, reported for fraud. Grayson did not fare much better. Word got around that he had been evicted by his own mother and lost $1,250,000 in assets because he laughed at her illness. He tried to apply for a job at a local real estate firm, but one of the interviewers had seen the video. They did not call him back. The internet had a name for him now, Mama Evicta. Memes popped up. One showed a Halloween mummy holding a deed. Another had Grayson's face photoshopped onto a Monopoly board with the caption, "Do not pass go. Do not collect inheritance." I did not laugh, but I did not feel sorry either because accountability does not require vengeance, just exposure. And sometimes justice is as simple as showing people who you really are and letting the consequences settle where they may. Back at Quiet Courage, we were preparing for winter. The women were knitting scarves. I taught a few how to make pecan pie from scratch. One of them, a sharp-tongued former librarian named June, offered to help catalog my journals. We turned the upstairs study into a library not of books of testimonies, handwritten accounts of abandonment, recordings of gaslighting, court documents, screenshots, photographs, all filed, time-stamped, and preserved. We called it the Room of Remembering because forgetting is how abuse survives, and remembering is how we end it. I kept my room simple. A bed, a rocking chair, a wall of framed photographs, Thomas holding Grayson as a baby. Me standing outside my old shop in Boston, a wedding picture from 1963, a snapshot of Ava in her graduation dress, and one of Eloise and me laughing taken just last month. Grayson never reached out. Belle tried to email once some half-hearted apology riddled with phrases like misunderstanding and hurt feelings on both sides. I marked it as spam because closure is not always a door swinging shut. Sometimes it is simply walking into a new room and realizing no one has the key but you. The last night of autumn, I sat on the porch with a blanket over my knees and a mug of tea in my hand. Snow had not come yet, but I knew it was close. The wind smelled like forgiveness, but not the kind you give to others, the kind you keep for yourself. And as I looked at the lights in the windows, the laughter from inside the women who once thought they had no place left to go, I whispered something I had not said aloud in years. I am home. And this time, no one could lock me out. She was young, early 20s, respectful but nervous, a recorder in one hand, a notebook in the other. Elena Ramos, local journalist, working on a story about elder resilience. Someone had told her about the Maison of Quiet Courage. About me. I'm honored you agreed to speak, she said, settling across from me on the porch. Don't flatter me yet, I replied. You haven't asked anything hard. She asked about the Maison, the workshops, the mission. I gave her the polished truth about dignity. About reclaiming silence. Then softer. Do you ever think about your son, about Belle? I sipped my tea. Every time I smell bleach and feel nothing, she blinked. Do you want them to apologize? No, I said. I want distant silence to live without explaining why I deserve to not be mocked. She closed her notebook. Can I ask one more thing off the record? What did you put in your will? I looked out at the snowy field, the wind nudging the chimes. I made it simple. The Maison went to the foundation. My journals to Ava for posthumous release. My thimble, the one Thomas gave me instead of a ring to Leia, the girl who stitched her first pillow with trembling hands. And I left one message handwritten inside the safe. If one day they end up on someone else's doorstep, if they knock with apologies rehearsed, I hope it's not the door of another mother who knows how to keep records. Elena sat silent, then whispered, That's the coldest and most powerful thing I've ever heard. It's not cold, I said. It's clear. There's a difference. She left. Her article was kind. She called it The Mother Who Refused to Disappear. It spread quietly. I declined interviews. I stayed in the workshop, baked pies, folded fabric, watched the women grow louder. Sometimes the phone rang. I never answered. Once a voicemail. Grayson. His voice cracked. Mom? I don't know who I am anymore. I thought I knew, but I don't. I miss something. I don't know if it's you or just the way things used to feel. No apology. Just, I hope you're okay. I really do. I deleted it, not out of spite, out of clarity. Because sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone who's lost is not hand them a mirror, but let them walk without one and discover alone what they truly are. That winter's last snow blanketed the house like a secret. I stood at my window sipping tea, watching the path disappear beneath white, and I thought, I am not erased. I am rewritten, and every word is my own. __. Thank you for listening to my story. If it made you think of your own mother or what silence can carry, then I've said enough. But if you want to hear more stories, true stories told from the quietest woman in the room, the kind they thought would never be spoken aloud, subscribe to, because revenge has no expiration date and sometimes the softest voice remembers the post.